Hey, see me afterwards I want to talk to you about your practice. I want to talk to you about something afterwards. Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today as we discuss some pretty difficult topics, but I pray that you'll help us to bring a biblical perspective to these issues as we live in pretty amazing times. And just watch over us and give us strength. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this, you'll see in a little bit what I'm talking about is of course, this is, I took this from the cover of the Current Economist, which says, like, how do we solve the Middle East problem? And there's a lot of things that you see. I would recommend you can go to Zero Hedge. You can look up an article that appeared a couple days ago that talked about how all these publications are talking about World War III. Now, is it really World War III? Are we going towards World War III? And the article was kind of suggesting, maybe not. Maybe it's not that bad. And this is part of the problem that you run into today is that, now I'm a lawyer. And as a lawyer, one of the things we have to do is, we have an adversary system here in the United States. And so you'll go to a case and each side will present their evidence. And then there will be a trier of fact, a judge or jury that will decide who wins, who loses. And that's just the way it is. But one of the things you do as you're preparing a case for trial is that you try to present the other side's case, because that's a good way to figure out the weaknesses in your case, if you can make a good case for the other side. And so then you know where you have to devise your attack and that type of thing. Now, one of the mistakes you can make as a trial lawyer, though, is that you can look at a pile of evidence and documents and everything. And when you're a young lawyer, you want to prove the case and you want to impress the partner that you're working for. And so there's a tendency that everything you pick up will prove your case. You'll find out soon that that's not a very good approach. So there's a tendency, I think, sometimes in Bible prophecy to do that, is everything I look at proves my particular view of things. So as I said, I take a little bit more open view as to how all these things are going to work out. I mean, I do have my opinion, but there's a lot of, some years ago, some friends of mine wrote a book called Blood on the Altar about the coming division between Christians. And I think they called that right. That book came out about 10 years ago with multiple authors. And we've seen a lot of eschatology wars, and I don't particularly care for them. And look, I've probably contributed to them too. So I'm not perfect. I'm sort of pointing my finger at myself. But today we're going to call this Stop Beating Yourself Up, You're Not Crazy. And you'll see why that is. But look at the imagery that's used remember there was this Wall Street Journal article years ago that had a fuse that was going down to the Middle East. And I used to use that as my title slide until YouTube decided it was too violent. Whatever. Like, there's nothing violent on YouTube. Like, that picture is going to just make, people, I don't know, get nervous, upset, lose sleep, and wet their pants or something. But this is the imagery that this is what a lot of the world is looking at. And so it's not just prophecy guys who are saying there's something going on, something's not right. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit at the beginning, and this may take up the whole time, and I may not get to much on the Middle East. If I don't, I'll put that into a midweek update. But I have some things that I think are pretty important that sort of relate to our politics, not sort of relate, that do relate to the political battles going on in the United States, but show the concept of narrative being pushed on us to control what we think. A lot of people in prophecy circles, here's an Arab News editorial cartoon from yesterday or today. And you see that the same imagery is used almost that The Economist had used. And I'm pretty sure that these guys don't know each other. one didn't look at the other and say, oh, well, I can do it a little bit better, a little more artistic than, just the yellow fireman. And, notice the color that was chosen for the fireman. I think that's very significant. So we talk about acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And as I think about this, I have to say I'm more and more convinced that I got this right. That these are the things that we're seeing all the time, is all these things are happening at the same time. They're happening more quickly. And I see people everywhere talking on secular programs, talking about there's a convergence of things that are going on. What's going on? And some people will, in the Bible prophecy community and elsewhere, will say, well, it's predictive programming. They're telling us everything that they're going to do. But listen, in the Bible, and I'll hold up my iPad because there's a Bible here, and you can't see that, but Bible prophecy is the ultimate in predictive programming, right? So, because it tells us the outlines of what's going to happen. So one of the great prophecy prognosticators each year lives in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And I know this because I grew up and went to high school in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and our local TV station reached our local TV station just down the street from us. That was a TV station that covered Punxsutawney. So a big deal every year. They go up there in the top hats and everything. And it says, without a shadow of a doubt, Phil sees early spring. And I sort of said, well, this year he's been watching prophecy updates, so he's ready for what's coming. He came out, but he didn't come out in the usual manner. He was prepared. And he's only right, I think, what did they say, 39% of the time. So hopefully it'll be an early spring. It was kind of hard driving to church today because clear blue sky, and that's only yesterday was like the first time in 3 months, and today's the second time in 3 months, and you're like, you can't see because what is that thing up in the sky? By the way, we have a total eclipse coming. The path of totality will be just on the other side of Interstate 71 from here. I think our house will be in the path of totality, but that raises an interesting philosophical question because a lot of people are like, oh, this is significant because there was an eclipse 7 years ago. Now there's this one coming and they're going to make an X and they're going to meet in the middle of the United States. And that means America's going to be X'd out. And some people think that, and maybe they're right. We don't know yet because it hasn't happened, right? So the best proof of how a particular view on Bible prophecy plays out is when it actually happens. At least that's my view, and I'm sticking to it. But the philosophical question would come about a eclipse in Ohio is sort of like, remember the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around, does it really make a sound? And so the question then is, if an eclipse happens in Ohio, but it's a cloudy day and you can't see it, does it really mean anything? So that's this. Now, I mentioned this last week. And so what I would kind of like you to see is you're looking through the news. And by the way, this, if I stack the papers up of everything that I reviewed, and then presented to you sort of a summary of that, there's a big difference. I read a lot. Pam will tell you I was probably down in my office for 14 hours yesterday, and I was down there at 3 o'clock this morning. And I'm still not done. But one of the sort of overarching themes that I've seen in discussing with people on the phone, Bible prophecy guys, we call each other up and talk. And I had a conversation with one the other day, and what we've sort of come to the conclusion as we've talked over the last weeks and months is that it appears that there's a lot of convergence. And one of the things is that the world seems to be running out of stuff all at the same time. Now, I did a talk up in Canada last year. You can go to last day's Bible Prophecy Conference and find that. And one of the things I talked about was maybe God has given us time markers in the prophetic scriptures, without setting a date or anything, that indicate there's sort of a window when this whole thing may wrap up, and that may come in the next decade. So if that's happening, a lot of the things you're going to see in Revelation are going to start to appear. And maybe God created the world so that after 6,000 years, everything's going to be running out and people are going to be fighting over everything and there's going to be wars and everything. And that sounds like the end times, and that seems to be the time that we live in. So here's an article from the National and the United Arab Emirates last week. Declines have been recorded in more than 2/3 of groundwater aquifers around the world over the last 100 years. And some of these are pretty significant. The New York Times did an article this week, and they said study pinpoints global falling and rising groundwater levels. So some places they're going up, some places they're going down, but the general trend is down. People are using up the water. Part of that is because there are some climate extremes and droughts that are taking place in a lot of places, and places are just drying up. So they use an example of Spain and Iran. Here's a little bit bigger picture of Iran. The red areas are down and the blue areas are up. And you can see that in Iran, it would appear that Iran is running out of water. But what happens when people run out of water? They go elsewhere to try to get water. And that leads to wars. Regardless of ideological differences, Jordan is probably the most drought-prone place on the planet. Now, I have this view of the seals that they open. Now, by the way, I want to say this, I should put this on here, not to scale. Because, how quickly they open is anybody's, I just don't know. So here's for example, let's look at the fourth seal. So they may open rapidly, but my view is that first seal opens and the effects of that first seal continue all the way through the 70th week that we talk about. Same way with the second seal, same way with the third seal. We know that there's a point where Jesus told us to look for the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And we know there's a whole bunch of events that take place around that period of time. Satan is cast out of heaven, the abomination of desolation. And for that abomination of desolation to take place requires some things to be put in place. So it's not like they build the temple or a structure there for sacrifices, and it's the abomination of desolation occurs the next day. It's going to be in place for a while, but it's going to take a while to put it in place. So that's the logistics part of what I talk about in Bible prophecy. And for example, in the fourth seal, there is a view that before the midpoint, that's why I put the white line there, that represents the midpoint. You knew that though, right? Instinctively. That represents the midpoint of this 70th week. And some people think that all of these seals and all of the trumpet judgments will take place before that midpoint is reached. I don't agree with that. I just don't think that that's a good way to look at it. But one of the things they say is that in the fourth seal, 1/4 of the world is killed. So that means if that seal opened a year into that 70th week, that means they have 2.5 years for 1/4 of the world to be killed. So I don't think that's what the scripture says, by the way. But let's just say that. So you look at that particular view, and so here's the seals, and also I think the seal scroll looks something like this, that the first seal opens and you're able to roll it a bit and read it. You don't have to break all the seals so you can read everything that's in the scroll. You break the first seal, you can read some. Second seal, you can read some, because our knowledge will increase. I think that's how I view it. And I found this graphic on the internet, and I thought it was pretty good. And you can see the seals actually correspond to what happens in the seals, the main thing happening in the seals. So back to my little thing, and I had worked out all of the numbers. Well, here's what the scripture says on the fourth seal. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say. So, by the way, what can you unpack from that? Well, there are four living creatures, at least four living creatures. So the fourth one says, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And the power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Now, a lot of my friends say that means a quarter of the earth is killed. And it's going to happen before this midpoint. I don't agree with it. I think it's a prophecy about the scope of power that these riders, whoever this is, exercises over the earth. One of my friends says a fourth of the earth. 24.9% of the earth's surface is land and the rest is water. So a fourth of the earth means that whoever has this has control over the whole earth. And I believe the person has ultimate power that he could kill with death, but look at the numbers. So let's say there's 9 billion people on the planet. And you're going to get rid of them in about a little over 2 years. Let's say 750 days. That means that you have to kill, if you do it in a nice proportional fashion, you have to kill 12 million people per day. You have to kill 500,000 people per hour, 8,333 per minute, and 138 people per second. Now, I don't know of anything that's been devised by man that can do that. And maybe it will be, okay? And maybe I'm totally wrong, because I think it's going to be bad. But I think it's going to continue throughout the whole last period of history that I call the 70th week. Others have a different name for it. We also have the shofar, the trumpet judgments, and we also have the bowl judgments. And this is kind of interesting. I found this graphic. I don't know where I found it. And I think this is how I represent the bowls. And you see the blood being poured out. In the temple service, there was a thing called the Mizrach. M-I-Z-R-A-Q is the anglicized spelling of it. And it was used to remove the blood from the sacrifices. And I think it's a picture of the bowl, particularly when you look at the way the bowl is designed, because the bowl is designed with what? It's got a pointed bottom. So if you set that bowl down when it's full of blood, it's going to spill all over the place. But if you pour out all of the contents of the bowl, then you can set it down, lay it down on its side. I think that's a perfect picture, because the bowl is going to be completely poured. The bowls of wrath are going to be completely poured out. So that's, and we live at this strange time. So there's a lot of theories running around now that the only reason the Kansas City Chiefs are in the Super Bowl is so that the girlfriend of one of the guys on the Kansas City Chiefs can endorse Joe Biden. And there's this singer is very popular. She had this huge tour. I even saw some people say, oh, that was just all fake. She did all that in front of a green screen. Like the people didn't really scramble to buy overpriced tickets for the little girls to go see this. But I want you to understand that this is the dark part of the music business that we don't talk about that much. So I don't really listen to her. And by the way, it's not the first time that a good-looking athlete and a good-looking singer have kind of become boyfriend, girlfriend. I mean, that sort of has happened in the past, right? But I want you to look at some of the imagery from one of her videos. And if you don't want to watch, it'll take about 30 seconds to get through these. But these are screenshots. I didn't want to get, because she's only making $1 billion, so I don't want to get sued for playing the video. And this is her. It's Taylor Swift. And I want you to look at the imagery and think, maybe you should think witchcraft. Well, yeah, look at this part of the video. These are actual, and by the way, who is behind the Baphomet mask? Well, there she is. And then the lightning comes through. So it's pretty clear that it's who it is. And the light that comes when she is unmasked. The imagery is very weird. Now she's going to be Dorothy on the Yellow Brick Road. But look at what's there. You see these guys dressed, and you find out that these guys are dressed like the Grim Reaper, and they're flipping the bird to her. But do you see the imagery that's there? And then there's this sands in the hourglass, and sort of a metamorphosis thing that's going on. And there's this other imagery of, the light harnessing the planets. It's just very bizarre stuff. And then there's this. It looks like mountainside, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what it really looks like up close. And then there's this. It sort of ends with, of course, this cup of coffee, which all millennials use. And it does end up striking midnight. Kind of interesting imagery in light of what we talk about all the time. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about migration. This is a huge problem. I think that it sort of ties in a lot of aspect of narrative. And so this migration is coming from Colombia on the right, through Panama, through a place called the Darien Gap. This is the Darien Gap. It's about 65 miles. It's jungle, mountains. It's a horrible place. Brett Weinstein.
But the first place that this trip really changed my understanding.
So he went down there with Chris Martenson from Peak Prosperity and another guy. And by the way, I don't think I'm sure he's an atheist. He's an evolutionary biologist. He was teaching at a very liberal left-wing college in Oregon. And in fact, he's from Oregon. We know that everybody from Oregon is kind of mostly lunatic, left-wing. I mean, they're having arguments in Oregon, and they decriminalize drugs for the most part. Now they're wondering, like, we got this big drug problem in Oregon. I wonder what happened. Really? You really need help figuring that one out? The answer is they probably do. So I'm not saying everybody in Oregon is crazy, but, if you throw a baseball down the street in Portland, you're going to hit a few morons. That's for sure. So here he's talking about the trip that he took down to the Darien Gap.
But the first place that this trip really changed my understanding was I went down thinking that I was going to see a migration. And other people have called it an invasion. And there's something troubling to me about the tension between these two things. Which is it? And I came away with the sense that it's probably literally both. And the way that manifests is you have a massive movement of people through the Darien from Colombia.
I saw Tucker Carlson, by the way.
I did not know when I went down. I now know that most of those people actually start in Ecuador. And the reason they start in Ecuador is that Ecuador has a policy where they don't require a visa. So people coming from all over the world can land in Quito, Ecuador, find their way through Colombia, move through the Darien, and if they survive it, which not all of them do, they can then get relatively directly all the way through Central America into the U.S. But that's not all that's going on. So we went to several of the, I guess you would call them, transit camps. These are places where people who have come by whatever route to Darien, where they recover if they're injured, and they have to accumulate money, because even if they set out on their journey with enough money to buy a bus ticket to get them through Central America, by the time they've come through Darien, almost all of them have been robbed. And much worse, actually. People are being robbed, women are being raped, and lots of people are dying. The migrants talk about stepping over bodies in Darien, and for somebody with experience in these kinds of jungles, it's not hard to see how, without a support network, the kinds of stuff that can happen in a jungle can become deadly very quickly.
So he had done a study, by the way, when he was working on his doctorate. He went to Panama. He lived down there, and he was studying tent-making bats. Because, and you know what, it probably was pretty good. And so I think he's atheist. He's an evolutionary biologist, but he's a scientist, and I think he's a good scientist, and he looks at things. He has a podcast. The podcast, so here's a guy not schooled in the Bible by any stretch of the imagination, as far as I can tell. What did you think he calls his podcast? The Dark Horse Podcast. Now, I'm a big guy on convergence. So I've seen the most popular singer in the world doing this. Now he's talking about it, and he's saying, listen, people are dying in the Darien Gap by the dozens, hundreds. And our government is facilitating this. What is going on? And they do it under the guise of we're humanitarian. Something is seriously wrong. And they say this, they may say this in the next clip that I have. And by the way, I don't recommend Tucker Carlson for everything. I just think this was a good interview that was very informative, particularly when we look at it from our biblical perspective as to what's going on. So here's the next part of this. And he says, listen, where are the other journalists? There's no journalists down here looking. Do you think there's like any reporter in the world that would be curious? He goes, it's unbelievable what I'm seeing. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They come through, they get to Panama, Panama waves them through, they get to the next border, and they're just ushered right through. And this is not, we're talking like 1,800, 2,000 miles to get to the southern border of the U.S. Remember, I talked about this when they had the kid caravans coming. So, the kids are walking across Mexico. It's 1,500 miles. Kids don't walk 1,500 miles. I'm sorry. Somebody's busing them or taking them by train, and we find out that there's a whole system. So here's the next part of the interview. This is fascinating. It's about 6 or 7 minutes.
But the first place that this trip really changed my understanding,
I do silence it too, by the way, for a reason.
Thinking that I was going to see a migration. And other people have called it an invasion. And there's something troubling to me about the tension between these two things. Which is it? And I came away with the sense that it's probably literally both. And the way that manifests is you have a massive movement of people through the Darien from Colombia. Now, I did not know when I went down. I now know that most of those people actually start in Ecuador. And the reason they start in Ecuador is that Ecuador has a policy where they don't require a visa. So people coming from all over the world can land in Quito, Ecuador, find their way through Colombia.
I think I post-played this. I added another thing. So here's and these are maps that they found people have in Spanish with all the detailed spots to stop and what services you can get. And these maps are all over the place down there. It seems like it's planned, right? Okay, so here's the next part.
Oh. This makes me think back to the COVID crisis and some thoughts that I was developing then about the insanity of throwing highly trained people, in many cases, out of the U.S. military for...
I couldn't say why they were kicked out of the military. You know why.
My sense at the time was that likely had the purpose of getting rid of the kinds of people who refuse immoral orders.
That's right.
And that it created a much more compliant force. Now, what happens if migrants are given citizenship in exchange for military service in the U.S. military? That seems to create a major hazard because the perverse incentives for a migrant and the lack of allegiance to fundamental American values means that that would be just the kind of force that could be used to impose tyranny on other Americans because they would have no history with us that would cause them to think twice.
We've seen this before with the Roman legions. That's exactly my conclusion. Does that sound like a crazy conclusion?
I think we have to stop punishing ourselves for considering things that once seemed crazy. Pattern of recent history.
I'm sorry, I want to repeat that. I think we have to stop punishing ourselves for considering things that once seemed crazy.
Yep.
Getting that tattoo.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where we are, and it is, it's causing me to do something that I'm reluctant to do. My training is as a scientist, and scientists have to have a substantial degree of caution and self-skepticism to do the work. But in order even to reach the possibilities that do fully explain what we're seeing, we have to be ready to consider the larger picture. Now, I was talking to Chris Martenson while we were in Panama. We were on our last day trying to just unpack what we had seen and what it meant to us. Chris is also a scientist. And people can check this out on the Dark Horse Locals community. We've posted the entire conversation in which he and I reached some, I think we spooked ourselves trying to reason through what this might be. And he reminded me of the massive number of surplus males that China now has as a result.
I was thinking the exact same thing as a result of the one-child policy.
The one-child policy. Now, here's the part that I suddenly realized as soon as he reminded me of that. I wrote an essay years ago about the one-child policy and the paradox of a heavy bias in favor of males. That logic should have applied to China. The fact is there were lots of excess males. And if you put yourself in the mindset of a Chinese person having a child, if there are too many males, you should want to produce a female. A male is very unlikely to find a mate. A female is certain to find one. And what's more, she has her pick of the litter.
Yes.
So that logic should have caused the sex ratio to return to 50-50, and yet it did not, which caused me all those years ago when I wrote this piece to wonder if there wasn't another evolutionary force in play. If evolution did not have a mechanism for producing armies, that when a country was in a position to expand, that producing excess males does pay off at a lineage level, that excess males who have no reproductive prospects at home become an effective weapon against neighboring populations. So I can't believe that that did not occur to me as I was preparing for this trip, but it has occurred to me now. I guess it didn't occur to me because when I wrote that all those years ago, I was expecting to see evidence that this was turning into a military force, and I didn't see it. So I stopped thinking about it. But now I wonder if that isn't exactly right, and if what happened is that a male-biased population in China was produced as a weapon, and if that weapon is now being deployed.
So that would, so far we have the U.S. government abetting this, the branch of the UN, Chinese government. Did you see any other funders or apparent funders of this?
Well, I'm not expert in this area at all. We did go to a place, and what impressed me was when we went back specifically to Fort Clayton, something that is now called the City of Knowledge. The City of Knowledge is housed in where it's central.
See the IOM on the flag?
Is the former Army South
UN
building
immigration
from the U.S. Southern Command. So this is both an important fact for the military, that the U.S. Southern Command is a segment of the military dedicated to protecting American interests in the Caribbean and all of Latin America south of Mexico. And it has this impressive structure in Fort Clayton, immediately above the Las Flores locks. So it was both physically there to protect the canal, and it was metaphorically this imposing presence looking out over.
To project power south.
Absolutely. And after the handover, all of the military bases that were in the canal zone were handed over, and this one has been taken over by the UN and the
Jimmy
international
Carter.
community, and all the NGOs have offices there. And it reminded me of how many things in our society had their purpose inverted. Right? Universities used to exist to make young people smarter and more analytically capable. Universities now make people stupider and convince them of things that just simply aren't true.
Yes.
Newspapers used to help us understand what the facts were about events that were taking place that involve us. Now, newspapers obscure the facts from us. They're the last to report the news after we embarrass them into doing it. So this structure that once was a testament to the achievement of the Panama Canal and the importance of protecting the Panama Canal is now involved in what looks like obvious subterfuge against American interests, right? An organization that is dedicated to facilitating migration without asking Americans, without there being any plan at all for how the well-being of these people is going to be financed. That their office, IOM, is sitting, if this building, U.S. Army South, the Las Flores locks, is it's like a person, and at that person's left knee is the IOM looking out at the Bridge of the Americas, which when I was there was the only way to cross the Panama Canal. Right? It's almost the exact inversion of what these structures were built for. And how many times do you have to see the inversion of something to begin to get the sense that something has taken over our system and it's become sick?
So why are all these people coming in? Maybe we have a military population problem. Maybe we have people say, hey, maybe have a relationship with a certain country, and they'll bring in thousands and thousands of males. And there's no doubt that thousands and thousands of males from that country have brought in military age male. By the way, they're in a kind of a demographic bind themselves. So I've been talking about this for a long time. So this is a Washington Post article from 2018. And the title of the article is Too Many Men. And you see a woman standing there. And what you see is a sea of men. And this is not true just of China. It's true of India. And I've heard numbers of 80, 100, 200 million males between those two countries, or on track to get to that number, that have no possibility of marrying a female. And when the country's in demographic decline, the population is dropping, you have a window. So here's my theory. This is John crazy talk. Well, maybe it's not so crazy. You shouldn't beat yourself up for thinking that what you're seeing is crazy, because you're seeing it. But what if God has designed this? We're running out of all this stuff, and the people are running out, but there are certain countries that have excess males that may want to do some things to preserve their legacy as their population declines. So here's this is from the World Economic Forum, top 10 countries by population. I'll zoom in here. And it shows how the global population now is 8.5. It's actually, this is from 2021 or 2022. It's probably 9 billion right now. They think it'll peak out around 10, maybe 10.9. But there are others that say it could go down, actually stay level, go up a little, then down. And we don't really have a model to do this because the population is going to be, you can see China, India, they start declining. Sub-Saharan Africa goes up. So here's a decline in the birth rate. South Korea down 86%. It's awful. China, Thailand, Japan. Then it has an effect on the populations. So this just some numbers here on the right, the decline in fertility. And so then we see the populations. Here's a little bit of a better graph. Now, some of the numbers won't match up, but if you look at the graph on the right, you see India has 1.5, this is in 2100. They have 1.5 million, that's 1.5 billion. China, which now has 1.4 billion, goes down to 700 million. Old math, that's declining by 50% in a fairly short period of time. It goes down a lot faster than it went up. Because here's the thing is, despite what people want to tell you, males don't have babies. I stand by the science on that. So here's another, this is a little bit different graph. So this is China, India number 2. Right now, I don't think you can see China up there very well. We got but it's 1.4 billion. But you see, you go over time, you see the light blue, it goes down, China 732 million, it's down by half. India goes down to 1 billion. Nigeria, though, it's now 206 million. It's going to be about 800 million. What's the next one? The U.S. stays basically level. Pakistan goes up from 214 million to about 250 million. Indonesia goes, I think it goes down a little bit. But look at Japan. Japan down here is 128 million, and you get out, it's 60 million. Do you understand that the fact that this is happening right now doesn't mean that they're out of people now. It just means that forward-looking leaders are going to recognize this as a problem. This is in Tablet Magazine, a Jewish publication. Our open border policy is not an accident. I'm convinced that it is. By the way, if we need people, why do they have to go through this Darien Gap hellacious experience to get to where they can get to the U.S.? By the way, why were all of our institutions turned over by Jimmy Carter 40 years ago? Was he just incompetent? Or did he know what he was doing? No, I'm serious. Remember, don't beat yourself up for thinking that you're crazy, because you're probably not if you're thinking. Here's a country, I've talked about this, Iran, aging time bomb. And Middle East Institute's writing an article about it. Big article in some Iranian Farsi publications that this is a problem. At the same time this is happening, and you don't see much about this, bank losses worldwide reignite fears over U.S. commercial property sector. By the way, that's from the UK. It should be commercial property sector all over the world. Big property company in China, their biggest Evergrande, has been ordered to liquidate. Sell everything. Well, what do you think that's going to do to the market? That's why banks have not been foreclosing on things here in the United States, because they know it will drive down the property values and it'll really mess up their loan portfolios. I know this for a fact. I've seen it happen over the last 4 years. Culturally, look at this. Dad of 11 convicted for praying in an abortion facility, along with 5 other pro-lifers targeted by the Department of Justice. They have a special prosecutor who is radically pro-abortion, and she's going after everybody that stands in her way. She's weaponized the legal system. Here's a picture of the protests that led to these people. They may spend 11 years in prison for doing this. And for some reason, my sound's not working. They're singing hymns. Now, go ahead, you can turn it up. Well, she's not really, she's not a great singer, but you get the point. These people could face 11 years in federal prison for that.
No, I want
This
to
is how
know
they
why you were banging
arrested.
on my door with a gun.
Remember when one guy got arrested? He said, "Oh, they didn't bring long guns. That's a big conspiracy theory." Oh, really?
You're not going to
Are
tell
we
me
crazy for
anything?
saying that? This is one of the guys convicted. This was
No,
when
you
he was
didn't.
arrested. They were trying
You
to
did
arrest
not
him
try.
in Tennessee. Oh, there's no long guns there. Oh, really? Watch this. Now, they came to
This
look
is
for
not
him.
acceptable. Can I have your name?
So they're convicted. The transgender thing, this big editorial in the New York Times this morning. Well, maybe we shouldn't adopt everything that the pro-transgender crowd puts out because it's not really based on science. So they're getting it. So here's a little interview. Chris Martenson and Whitney Webb. She does good work. She does kind of has a tendency to go down some directions that I don't like, but I think she's an important person that she investigates things. I just don't necessarily always agree with her conclusions, but here they're sort of talking about what is going on. What is going on in this world?
I meant every word of it, and I'd like to start at the top if we could. I like to work from the top down or outside in. Burning question. The burning question to set all this up is, we're up against the plots. Are we up against the plots of evil geniuses, or are we suffering under the tyranny of midwits, doing the best they can, but leading us to ruin? That is, how much of what we're experiencing in your estimation today is intentional, and how much is accidental?
Yeah, so I think, I tend to view most of what's going on as intentional, and I think they use the perception of what they're doing as incompetence as a way to cover up for their crimes a lot of the time. So I think ultimately what we're seeing is an effort to sort of herd the world towards what I would refer to as a neo-feudal model. So sort of going back to the same concentration of power that existed in the feudal era, or the Dark Ages of Europe, as it were, where you sort of have kings and you have sort of their enforcer class, and then you have a large serf underclass, and that the goal is to have basically those strata, the differences between them, enforced by technology, I think a key component of that is the efforts to control the flow of information, because in that era, right, the church dominated the flow of information and knowledge, and a lot of this was later, spread around and distributed to the serf class through the printing press and things like that, and now in modern iterations, the internet. And in order to bring things back to the neo-feudal era, the powers that be have to take complete control of the internet and the flow of information, and I think that's why we're seeing this increased push of censorization, and also to have, AI chat, generative AI that they produce end up producing the lion's share of the content online. Those two things, I think, go together in order to sort of manufacture reality so that we're more easily controlled and herded into these various systems that they're setting up that will maintain the vast majority of the populace in this serf underclass. And a lot of the big establishment thinkers on AI have pretty much talked openly about how that technology is being used to create sort of the upper class, the kings of the data barons, I guess, of the modern era, as opposed to the oil barons of previous eras, and how, the people that control the data that AI trains on and the people that program and maintain AI will be sort of in this upper class, and that AI will act upon the lower class, and the lower class over time will become cognitively incapable of understanding what AI is doing to them and how it's molding their opinions, and will become dependent on AI for everything, and will not really be able to function without it, or even make their own decisions and know their own preferences without it. And, this was laid out by people like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, Henry Kissinger, figures of that variety, openly talking about how this is where.
Actually, they wrote a book on AI, and they did a big article in The Atlantic on it a few years ago when the book came out. Henry Kissinger, who has since passed on, but Eric Schmidt, who was former head of Google, and they called it The Metamorphosis. AI will bring many wonders. It may also destabilize everything from nuclear defense to human friendships. We need to think much harder about how to adapt. Notice what was one thing that they didn't say in that, and a big long book that they wrote. You can buy it on Amazon. Don't do it. And so we have these rituals that take place. By the way, this is a sphere. This is actually a sphere arena, and costs about $2 billion to build in Las Vegas. And you're never further than row 20 from the stage. And giant screens, and this is the outside. So it kind of looks like, I would just say, before you go looking for a lot of pictures about this, you need to be kind of careful because they get pretty dark, darker than the Taylor Swift stuff that I showed you. So here's this, and here we have tech CEOs face another ritual denunciation. I'll show you a little bit of that. And big article in The Atlantic, the rise of techno-authoritarianism. There's a link to that in the notes below, but it's behind a paywall, and I couldn't figure out how to get it around the paywall. So if you want to sign up for a trial subscription to The Atlantic. Atlantic's a left thing, but listen, the left, there are people on the left and liberals like Brett Weinstein are saying something's going on. Something is not right about what's going on. And it's converging in a lot of ways, none of which seem to be good. So, for example, here's a quote from this article. The new technocrats claim to embrace Enlightenment values, but in fact, they are leading to an anti-democratic, illiberal movement. This is a publication that would think, well, you can see they cite a guy named Mark Andreessen, and he said this, he's a big tech guy, and he said, we believe we should place intelligence and energy in a positive feedback loop and drive them both to infinity. We believe in adventure, undertaking the hero's journey, right? Rebelling against the status quo, mapping uncharted territory, conquering dragons, and bringing home the spoils for our community. So when Whitney Webb says, it sounds like they're trying to recreate the feudal dark ages in Europe, like when there's stories and legends about dragons and everything. This is what the technocrats want to do. Now do you begin to understand a little bit about this mark of the beast technology that we spend a lot of time talking about? But in recent years, it's become clear that regulation is needed. This is what the article says, not least because of the rise of technocracy proves that Silicon Valley's leaders simply will not act in the public's best interest. Much should be done to protect children from the hazards of social media and to break up monopolies and oligopolies that damage society and more. At the same time, I believe that regulation alone will not be enough to meaningfully address the cultural rot that the new technocrats are spreading. A pretty bold article for The Atlantic. Didn't see the Wall Street Journal write it, by the way. So there was a hearing that Peggy Noonan wrote about, that this ritual beating up of the social media people takes place every now and then in Washington. And by the way, whatever happens, what comes out of that? Regulation to protect people? It never happens, okay? It's just mainly to get a lot of sound bites for your next campaign. But here's Josh Hawley with Mark Zuckerberg the other day at the Senate.
Mr. Zuckerberg, let me start with you. Did I hear you say in your opening statement that there's no link between mental health and social media use?
Senator, what I said is I think it's important to look at the science. I know people widely talk about this as if that is something that's already been proven. And I think that the bulk of the scientific evidence does not support that.
Well, really, let me just remind you of some of the science from your own company. Instagram studied the effect of your platform on teenagers. Let me just read you some quotes from the Wall Street Journal's report on this. Company researchers found that Instagram is harmful for a sizable percentage of teenagers, most notably teenage girls. Here's a quote from your own study. Quote, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." Here's another quote. "Teens blamed Instagram," this is your study, "for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. This reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups." That's your study.
Senator, we try to understand the feedback and how people feel about the services we can improve.
Wait a minute, your own study says that you make life worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls. You increase
Senator, that's not
anxiety
what it
and
says.
depression. That's what it says. And you're here testifying to us in public that there's no link. You've been doing this for years. For years, you've been coming in public and testifying under oath that there's absolutely no link. Your product is wonderful. The science is nascent, full speed ahead, while internally, you know full well your product is a disaster for teenagers.
Senator,
and yet
that's
you
not
keep
true.
right on doing what you're doing. Right?
Not true. That's not true.
Let me show you some other facts I know that you're familiar with. Wait a minute. That's not a question. That's not a question. Those are facts, Mr. Zuckerberg. That's not a question.
Those aren't facts.
Let me show you some more facts. Here's some information from a whistleblower who came before the Senate, testified under oath in public. He worked for you, a senior executive. Here's what he showed he found when he studied your products. So, for example, this is girls between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. 37% of them reported that they had been exposed to nudity on the platform unwanted in the last 7 days. 24% said that they had experienced unwanted sexual advances they'd been propositioned in the last 7 days. 17% said they had encountered self-harm content pushed at them in the last 7 days. Now, I know you're familiar with these stats because he sent you an email where he lined it all out. I mean, we've got a copy of it right here. My question is, who did you fire for this? Who got fired because of that?
Senator, we study all of this because it's important and we want to improve our services.
Well, you just told me a second ago you studied it, that there was no linkage. Who did you fire?
Yeah, I said you mischaracterized.
37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. You knew about it. Who did you fire?
Senator, this is why we're building all.
Who did you fire?
Tools. Senator, I don't think that's.
Who did you fire?
I'm not going to answer that.
Because you didn't fire anybody, right? You didn't take any significant action.
It's appropriate to talk about.
It's not appropriate.
HR decisions.
Do you know who's sitting behind you? You've got families from across the nation whose children are either severely harmed or gone, and you don't think it's appropriate to talk about steps that you took? The fact that you didn't fire a single person? Let me ask you this. Have you compensated any of the victims?
Sorry?
Have you compensated any of the victims? These girls, have you compensated them?
I don't believe so.
Why not? Don't you think they deserve some compensation for what your platform has done? Help
Senator,
with counseling services, help with dealing with the issues that your services cause?
Our job is to make sure that we build tools to help keep people safe.
Are you going to compensate them?
Okay. He gave some weak apology. You can find it on C-SPAN if you want to beat yourself up a little bit more than I beat you up already with this. But he really learned his lesson. He walked out of that meeting, and the next morning, Meta, Facebook, and by the way, go out, either get on Google Maps, put on the satellite view, go out 161 to New Albany, go south on Beach Road, and see the giant server farms out there, which is one of many, many, many that they have around the country to store your data, your information that they use. They announced record profits and earnings. I think it was like $40 billion. And the stock jumped up. The next morning, Mark Zuckerberg's stock value that he owns went up $29 billion. He learned his lesson. Next day. Do we have a problem? By the way, I used to call her Jen Zuckerberger, so here's a side-by-side comparison. Just saying. Have you ever seen them together? No, I'm just kidding. So, look, we have a big problem. Neuralink came out this week, put in their first brain implant, their first chip implant. And I've talked a lot about this. So what's going on? We need to understand that, as it says in Ephesians 6, we're in a spiritual battle. We don't wrestle against physical, this people of this world. We against principalities and powers and spiritual forces in high places. And I hope you've been able to see of some of the things I've gone through today that we're in that battle. And it's more apparent now than I think it's ever been in the history of the church. And it permeates everything, everywhere. And I like the terminology that I think Whitney Webb used about the kings of the tech empires. I'm not so sure that this is not part of the final kings that we talk about in Revelation and the little horn that rises. Some people have posited it. I'm like, it's one of my buckets that I put evidence in as it comes along. Tech empire, beast empire bucket, little horn bucket, and I know everybody's got their thing. I'm just saying is I've got a bunch of buckets. And then when, it turns out to be a certain way, just kick all my buckets out of the way and say, see, I had it all along. I have plausible deniability. Go read Revelation or Daniel chapter 10. It talks about one of these powerful spiritual forces, the Prince of Persia. Now, one might expect that the Prince of Persia has been around for a long time and is still around today, that maybe we would be having problems with Persia in the world today. Oh, well, maybe we are. I just want you to understand that all this stuff that we read about in the Bible that talks about the future, not always in specific terms, but it gives us guidelines and outlines. All of those will, when it's time, play out in a real world. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we living in that world? One might think, well, it appears that Israel's kind of important, but, Israel's not really that important to the world today, is it? I mean, people don't really spend a lot of time worrying about Israel or that, unless you run like The Economist magazine and then you kind of show, oh, well, the Middle East is kind of the pivot point of all of this stuff. So I'm going to just take a brief look at some of the things that are going on in the Middle East because there's a lot of stuff that's happening. The UN agency that you see down there in Panama, same guys, same organization. They fired a bunch of their people because they had ties to Hamas. Here was an article. Israeli intelligence estimates that 10% of the agency's 12,000 staff in Gaza are affiliated or have membership in Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And by the way, 58% of the money that UNRWA uses out of their budget goes to education. Go look at Impact SC, go to Palestinian Media Watch, that's Itamar Marcus's organization, and look at what they've come up with. By the way, Itamar Marcus, I'm trying to arrange an interview with him. He went to London to, knowing him a little bit, I don't know that I'm sure he went and had a discussion with the people at the parliament in London about the problems that they're doing about funding these organizations. But I think he's really yelling at them. And if he could have said exactly what he wanted to say. Question, will Biden finally detour Iran? And I hear people say, oh, Biden's being very nice to Israel. I'm not seeing it, my friends. Biden's grand bargain. Can a new Middle East emerge from the turmoil? This is all over the press everywhere. In an election year, the U.S. president is seeking political capital by offering diplomatic incentives to rival states in the region, including recognition of Palestine. And they're saying in the State Department, we may just go ahead and do it. Recognize the state of Palestine. That's insanity. That's rewarding them for what they did. This is there are a lot of articles about drones this week And I'll talk a little bit more smart weapons that are being used in Ukraine, and everybody's getting, figuring out how to use them and build them. Europe's having protests by farmers. And of course, then the dutiful person at, I don't know, the time, I think it was at The Guardian, comes and writes, well, I went and looked at the farmers' protests, and I just found they were a bunch of people that didn't agree with each other. It's no big deal. Buddy, it'll be a big deal when there's nothing for you to eat except bugs. Enjoy them. So you see these protests going on all over the place. We have to deal with this, the Muslim ascendancy. There's a war, conflict going on between the Sunni South and the Sunni Shia North. I think that might relate to the Daniel 11 scenario that talks about the king of the north and king of the south. Now, I may not be right on that. I'm just saying it's sure being set up. And there's this big push on a Palestinian state. And I'm just telling you, I know Israel won't agree to it, but it might be shoved down their throats by the world. Now, they may not follow it. I'm just telling you, this is the way it seems to be set up. America's richest, this is from Tablet, America's richest universities are protecting hate-filled foreign students. So, we see all these protests at Harvard, MIT, Penn, all these expensive Ivy League schools, $100,000 a year to send your kid there. Now, you might get financial aid. Foreign students all over the place. They're like 25% of Harvard because they pay full tuition. Cornell. And by the way, the growth hasn't been in professorships in education spending. It's been in administrators. I believe it was Cornell, Ivy League school, Ithaca, New York. They have 2 administrators now for every student. What? How do they do that? Call Washington. They'll send you a check. Well, average in the Ivy League is 15%. Yeah, a quarter of Harvard's student body is now. By the way, the reason why they don't do anything, these presidents, because if they discipline them, they then fall under an act that says they have to be expelled from the country. If they're expelled from the country, guess what happens? They don't pay tuition to a place they can't go to school for. So the U.S. struck back in the Middle East. Finally, there were about 40 people killed in some of those strikes. Again, this is from The Economist. How to end the Middle East agony. President Joe Biden should speed up this transition by peeling over Mr. Netanyahu's head. If not, just get rid of him outright. Just as Mr. Netanyahu has sometimes spoken over the head of American presidents, actually he spoke up. He actually opposed Barack Hussein Obama. He didn't like what he did. Oh, my goodness. Imagine. Now, a lot of argument in Israel about whether you should support Netanyahu or not. I'm not going down that road. I'm just saying it's okay to tell Israel how they should act, right? Not okay for Israel to tell anybody else how they should act. He should open an embassy in Jerusalem for the Palestinian to match Donald Trump, the one Donald Trump opened for Israel. He should set out how America sees the parameters for a Palestinian state, and if Israel doggedly refused to engage, should be ready to recognize one himself. By the way, back to that Atlantic article on the techno-authoritarians. He actually, sometimes when you're left-wing, you just can't break free of it. It's just got a hold on you, because he suggested that one of the solutions was that maybe we should send more kids to universities. That'll get them on thinking the right way. Sorry, you're kind of living in the past. That doesn't happen anymore. Egypt's losing a lot of money because of its economic collapse. This is an official spokesperson. He's been around for 20-some years for Hamas. And you can see he's right out front, letting you know exactly who he is. He's so proud of his And nobody knows what he looks like. He's been like this. So he put up a big video, and there's no sound on this, so you can just say, but he gives this big thing. And one of the interesting things is he talks about 100 days. He's official spokesperson for the Al-Qassam brigades. And he says why we did October 7th. We're going to continue it. We're going to go on. We're going to continue to fight. But here's what he said, which is kind of interesting from a Bible prophecy standpoint. As we have been informed by various sources in the resistance fronts that they are seeking to expand their strikes against the enemy in the coming days in light of the continued aggression on Gaza, we will not tire or falter in calling all the free people of the nation to rise to support Aqsa and the path of their prophet, which the criminal Zionists are practically advancing towards destroying and establishing their temple. Oh, they know where the temple was too. They used to publish it. To all the fighters of our great people, the sons of Al-Uri, Al-Qasi, Al-Karmi, and Tawalaba, in our blessed West Bank, and all the nation's fighters who will have Arab and Muslim blood flowing in their veins, seize this historical moment to speak your word to the world and sign your allegiance to Al-Aqsa flood. Know that the nightmare of extinction that the enemy is living is being hastened by its Nazi leaders' feet towards Allah's inevitable destiny to defeat and plot against them. This was a thing I found on my Facebook feed. I thought that was a very interesting. That's Israel, a map of Israel. Very interesting. Saudi Arabia's come out and said they're open to Israel bypassing steps for a Palestinian state. Things are in a big turmoil in Israel. A few things on that. This is a poll that appears in Israel Hayom on Friday. They did a big poll of people in Israel. And right now, if you look at what would happen, I've put down here like the state party, Likud, Atid, Shas. You'll have to freeze the thing. I'm not going to read through all the names. Likud right now, they're going to go down from 32 to 19. Gantz's party here on the left goes from 12 to 34 members of parliament. So that could change. So if there are early elections, and a lot of people, they're trying to push for early elections because they want to get rid of Netanyahu. So these are the people that would be in the coalition. Number 9 there, that's Avigdor Lieberman's party, Yisrael Beiteinu. And Yesh Atid, they're not holding fast. They're kind of going down. Gantz is ascending. And then this would be the other coalition. So the coalition would be 71 to 49. Which means that Netanyahu would be out of power. They also have different scenarios. For example, if a different guy replaces Netanyahu at Likud, they stay at 19. Some of the others go down, some of the others go up. Doesn't really help. Then they did a thing where Yossi Cohen, who's a former head of Mossad, what happens if he goes to Likud party, joins Likud party, and they would go up a little bit, but I don't know if it's enough to put them over the top. Then they did a thing where Naftali Bennett and Yossi Cohen joined together, and they actually sort of took the lead. They would get the ability to form a government. This is a letter to Benjamin Netanyahu that appeared in the Israel Hayom in the midst of these polls, right? One of the pages in between there. And essentially, I won't read the whole letter. I won't read it in Hebrew, that's for sure. But I did translate. It's not that easy when it's a picture to translate, but it's possible. And they crawl all over Benjamin Netanyahu because they said, you traded this guy who leads Hamas now. You traded him for one hostage. And they're talking about a hostage deal. And right now, the hostage deal is for every single Israeli person who's released, Israel, you have to release 1,500 of us. Now, these people are saying, Netanyahu, don't do that because those people will come and kill us. And you'll be responsible. And people are upset with Netanyahu. Look at the mess we're in. We're in Gaza where people are dying and that type of thing. But look, and he didn't obey the warnings. But my point is, if he obeyed the warnings, what would they do? They would go into Gaza, just like they have. That's the only thing they could have done. So Avigdor Lieberman, he did an interview for Israel, and essentially what he says in this interview is, I think Netanyahu is setting it up so he can resign and go home and retire. Now, Lieberman and Netanyahu really don't get along. They haven't for years. He won't join the thing now. One of the lightning rods of Israeli politics, this is from the Wall Street Journal this morning, the first foreign language interview that Ben-Gvir has done, and he's on the right, and anybody on the right is an extremist, so he's an extremist. He's a firebrand. And he does, I saw him at the Knesset a year ago when he was just taking office. He is very out there. He doesn't, one of the things I think that protects me is I have a very strong filter to protect me from saying things I shouldn't say. And he doesn't have that filter. So they had a big conference in Jerusalem and said, listen, we're going to go settle Gaza. We're going to solve the problem. We're going to go settle Gaza. And I have friends who lived in Gaza. They got kicked out in 2005. And by the way, the one thing, Gaza seemed to be under control when Jewish people lived there. So you can get the Wall Street Journal article. He wanted to hand out, my goodness, he wanted to hand out assault rifles to people in the West Bank so they could protect themselves. They're being attacked all the time. You see the car attacks and all this that happens. Those are real people. Now, crucially, Ben-Gvir has enough support in his ruling coalition to undermine Prime Minister Netanyahu's rule, and he says he is willing to use it. In his first interview with a foreign news organization since joining the government, Ben-Gvir warned that he would oppose any deal with Hamas that would free thousands of Palestinians held for terrorism or end the war before Hamas was fully defeated. Netanyahu is at a crossroads, Ben-Gvir said, and he has to choose what direction he wants to go. The U.S. and its regional allies backed talks to swiftly end the war through a deal in which Hamas and other militant groups would release the remaining hostages and restart decades-old negotiations to establish a Palestinian state. An increasing portion of Israelis, especially on the right, instead view the October 7th attack as a chance to chart a new course for Israel by resettling the battle-scarred enclave. Ben-Gvir laid out his own plans for Gaza, which would repopulate the devastated coastal strip with Israeli settlements, while Palestinians would be offered financial incentives to flee. By the way, one of the things I've noticed on social media, what was the narrative before Israel invaded? This is an open-air prison. It's a concentration camp. So this week they're posting pictures of, look at this beautiful neighborhood that they destroyed. Look at this beautiful shopping mall. Look at this beach resort that they destroyed. Shortly after this article was published on Sunday, centrist Israeli politicians attacked Ben-Gvir for what he said during the interview and urged Netanyahu to discipline the far-right leader. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, who controls the second largest party in Netanyahu's emergency government, wrote on X that Ben-Gvir's attacks on Biden harmed the strategic relations of the state of Israel, the security of the state, and current war effort. Opposition leader Yair Lapid called Ben-Gvir's comments a direct attack on Israel's international standing. And so this is they're having a big argument there about how they should proceed. Now, I saw a pretty good thinker. He said, well, we should just play like we're going along with the United States and then not do it. They can't expect us to be insane. I think our government does. A coalition official called Ben-Gvir a headache for Netanyahu, but said his influence was limited. So this is, you can go try to find the article at Wall Street Journal. And so these are some of the things going on. We have the attacks coming from different areas. The Houthis, Iran, influencing Syria, Iraq. We have the Gaza Strip. Look at this picture. This is a little video of what's happened to the Gaza Strip. It's devastated. I mean, it's really been destroyed. The red areas are areas where the buildings have been pretty much destroyed in the Gaza Strip. They estimate 60% of all the buildings are uninhabitable. Problems in the north continue along the border. Just a summary of some of the attacks along the northern border with Lebanon. There were a bunch of rocket attacks from the north today, or drone attacks. Don't know if that's going to expand into anything. You have the Houthis, that they're attacking the shipping in the Red Sea. The kind of bright green area there, that's the Houthi area of Yemen. And they're trying to shut down shipping. It's down like 40% through the Suez Canal. A big protest in Sana'a, which is where the Houthi capital is. Another article, I think Guardian, a fresh wave of Muslim militancy is looming. Boy, is that ever true. And then, look, so this is Colonel Macgregor. I have my own opinions about him, but I'm just going to give you what his tweet is, what he says is going to happen. Okay? So let's see, is he right? The populations in the Middle East region are very angry, enraged, and ready to destroy Israel. The region is moving towards a state of war which could culminate in the destruction of Israel, and I don't think we can stop it. Wake up. That's what he tweeted this week. You remember my the canary on life support graphic that I've used in my title slide sometimes? My all-time favorite, if I had to rank them. It appears that the Tehran Times is sort of pirating things. This is their view of how the Houthis are dealing with shipping in the Red Sea. They're stealing my stuff. They're stealing my ideas. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. We attacked a bunch of sites, 40 people killed in Syria and Iraq. Even used B-1 bombers to do it. I mean, everything is a mess. Here is Hamas leaders aren't getting along. The guy in Gaza is not getting along with the guy who lives in a penthouse in Qatar. Oh, by the way, I believe he goes to the barber every day to keep that beard groomed like that. Suffering, poor, billionaire, multi-billionaire. And then here's an article, this is from The Guardian, about drones and how that is developing. Just a couple more things and we're done. So here is China's upgrading its nuclear arsenal. North Korea's making a lot of statements. The Center for Security and International, CSIS, has a big thing on conflict zones. Of course, we have Russia, Ukraine, we have Hamas, Israel. And this is what they say, the thing for Israel in the years ahead. Every day will be October 8th, but with the fear that it is October 6th. Israel's sense of security after decades of limited conflict with its neighbors has been shattered. So there's a lot of things going on, as you can appreciate. I think the big thing to take away from today, though, is this development of technology and the willingness to use it to control the narrative and to sort of intrude in every aspect of everyone's lives. Now, I love technology, okay? I forget where I was. We have cameras at home. And, so I was in Scotland. And out in the middle of nowhere, and I pulled out my phone, and I think I sent a text to Pam and said, why did you leave the house this morning at such and such a time? How'd you know I did that? Well, you got a camera on It shows me when you leave. So the technology is great. But the downside of it is Pam also knows when I leave the house and forget something because I come back, and she can see that. There's a video record of it. Go read Daniel chapter 10. Go read Daniel chapter 8. And read Revelation 17 and 18. Those will, and sort of put those into the context of what we see going on in the world today and understand. I don't think we've seen anything yet. We're going to see a lot more. So let's pray and let's go. Lord, thank you so much for the blessing that you gave us to tell us about the times in which we live. Thank you for the blessing of living at a time like this when we can see that even though it's hard sometimes to realize that you are in control of everything. And we know that you are in control and that you're giving us opportunities to share the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. Pray you'll give us those opportunities. Pray you'll give us wisdom and power to stand firm and to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.